Sometimes ancient Egypt is viewed as being more actively involved with Mediterranean civilizations, as their interactions with Greece and Rome or other Levantine societies are often highlighted and discussed. When we speak about Egypt in its African context, we tend to only focus on its immediate relationship with their neighbors, like the Nubians. So today, I wanted to discuss the information we have concerning the relationship Egypt had with the rest of the continent. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and supporting this content. If you'd like access to full courses and sources, or you simply want to show your support, you may do so by clicking the Patreon link in the description box below. Before I begin, I have to give a disclaimer. A lot of this video will be driven more so by an academic hypothesis from leading scholars, rather than an agreed upon historical stance acknowledged by said scholars. In other words, there is no unified scholarly position concerning this topic. Most scholars do agree, however, that the relationship between Egypt and the rest of Africa below the Sahara does indeed exist and needs to be studied much more. Unfortunately for us in the diaspora, this is uncharted territory, and we're forced to rely more so on common sense rather than extensive peer-reviewed research. So please keep that in mind. So let's focus on Egypt's relationship with the rest of Africa below the Sahara. Now, there are many aspects of African culture that can be seen as having a strong tie or relationship with the Nile Valley in general. The evidence is overwhelming, especially when we consider the oral traditions of various African peoples. However, we still need to take caution because various perspectives can be plausible. For example, most genuine scholars would agree that many African cultures from across the continent influenced Egyptian culture as it flowed into the Nile Valley very naturally. So seeing remnants of these ancient cultural identifiers in other African groups in relation to Egypt is not necessarily evidence of Egyptians having contact with these people after the formation of Egyptian civilization. In other words, just because we see a headrest in various cultures throughout Eastern Africa does not at all mean that they had ancient contact with the Egyptians. It may just mean that there is cultural continuity throughout most of the continent, especially regionally. So I'm focusing on Egyptians who physically left the Nile Valley and went to other parts of Africa. Let's start with West Africa. There are many African ethnic groups that speak about coming from the Nile Valley in general, but we only know of about two main indications of possible Egyptian contact in ancient times. Let's start with the Nigerian hypothesis. It's permissible to wonder, and so far hardly anyone has, whether the Egyptians were able to use Nigerian tin. In ancient times, there were two known and remote sources of tin production. That being said, it's reasonable to assume that the ancient tin mines of Nigeria could have economically advanced the knot culture, assisting them in spreading their culture and extending the boundaries of their civilization. Their access to the tin mines may have afforded them a trade-like relationship or even a market in the Nile Valley. That may seem far-fetched to us, but one scholar named Hamid Zayed, given the evidence he's seen, does not shy away from this possibility. He's convinced that this needs to be investigated much more because it will be an important discovery in our understanding of Egypt's relationship with the rest of the African continent. The next indicator of ancient Egyptian contact with West Africa comes from a sort of pseudo-Abrahamic written tradition coming out of Timbuktu. The written and oral records of the history of two ancient cities, Katoka and Kokia, one which is said to date back to the time of Moses, also sheds light on the migration and settlement patterns of the populations that later became the Songhai people. These cities, Katoka and Kokia, are in present-day Nigeria and Mali. However, there is some confusion regarding these historical locations. The Soninka scholar and author of the Tariq al-Fatash, Ibn Mokhtar, suggested that the emissaries sent by the Pharaoh of Egypt to consult the Songhai priests found them in the ancient city of Katoka. Now, there's virtually no way to confirm this, but it is possible that the author was mixing genuine trade-like relationships between the ancient Songhai and Egypt and a general desire for Sudanic Muslims to place themselves in the Abrahamic narrative. A more popular indication of ancient Egypt's relationship with the rest of Africa is Hatshepsut's journey into the land of Punt. Now, scholars aren't exactly sure where Punt was located, but most agree that it was in or around the Horn of Africa. Egyptian vessels sailed to Punt to seek precious incense and many other products. Ramses III also supposedly sent a fleet to Punt to trade. Most people aren't aware that there were journeys into Punt before Queen Hatshepsut. At that time, the Egyptians had very little information about Punt. They obtained incense from middlemen who spread legends about this country in order to raise the price of incense. A man from Aswan during the Old Kingdom says, I went forth with my lord, the count and treasurer, and my lord, the count and treasurer of the god Kui, of the god Theti to Cush, to Bablos, and Punt, 11 times. Wall relief depictions of later Egyptian journeys into Punt under Queen Hatshepsut taught us a little about life in Punt, its plants, animals, inhabitants, and cone-shaped huts. The land of Punt is perhaps the most popular and the most well-documented occurrences of Egyptian expedition into Africa below the Sahara. Under Pepe II, a man named Harkuf, who was an Old Kingdom official, journeyed to a place called Yan, which was in all likelihood still within the confines of ancient Nubia. Now, Egyptian and Nubian relationships are well known, but the implications of a dwarf dancer in Nubia seems to suggest something much bigger. Now, scholars are very hesitant to assume anything when it comes to the relationship between dwarf dancers in ancient Egypt and the rest of Africa, but many people suggest that the dwarf that Harkov acquired in Nubia was actually an Mbuti man from the Congo region. The assumption is not at all far-fetched and is very reasonable, as the existence of short men in the Congo region is well known. If this so-called dwarf was indeed an Mbuti man or any other ethnic group of shorter African people, then we should be able to assume that the Egyptians and various Nubian ethnic groups traveled and traded with Mbuti people further south in Central Africa. We still have to be cautious with absolute statements, but the evidence does seem to point in that direction. Lastly, we have what I believe to be the most interesting piece of evidence that clearly reveals the relationship between Egypt and the rest of Africa below the Sahara. This last piece of evidence has baffled scholars, and to be blunt, they really don't know what to do with it. The evidence is the discovery of undeniable Egyptian objects in the heart of Africa. A statuette of Asar dating from the 7th century BC was found in the Democratic Republic of Congo on the banks of the river Lualaba. Also, a statue inscribed with the cartouche of Thutmose III was found south of the Zambezi River. Now, it's one thing to find a religious figure in Asar, but to find an object indicating the name of a pharaoh is special because it gives context. Most scholars really are critical concerning the discovery and are suspect about how the items were discovered, so they make no absolute statements concerning the obvious implications. So again, we have to work with our own common sense and academic guesses. The fact that the cartouche of Thutmose III was found in Central Africa is very interesting because Thutmose was said to be the greatest conqueror in Egyptian history, and he created the largest empire Egypt had ever seen. Given that information, is it then any surprise that he may have sent expeditions further south to investigate the value of conquering into those regions, or to find new streams of income for his empire? I personally think these ideas cannot be ruled out. But who knows? At the end of the day, there needs to be much more investigation into Egyptian contacts with the rest of Africa, not to centralize Egypt, but simply to see the relationships other Africans had with each other and how they tangibly influence each other, a topic that's seldom explored in general. Well, I'm Ola, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.